which is rock.
Right.
Remember that?
Yes.
That went round and round and round.
Yeah.
And the county got shut down.
Yeah.
And those houses up there.
So, yeah, I think I like the idea of kind of keeping the issues separate from one another.
I'd like to draw your attention to number 7, or recommendation number 7. I'm not quite sure why that recommendation's in here, and whether that's something that we need to be focused on or concerned about. I mean, if the city owns the land, right?
But not all open space is owned by the city.
No.
There are some subdivisions where we require them to put aside open space, and it usually goes into an association.
I'm not sure I can tell you
Why
that was put in.
But if it's open space and it's preserved,
Yeah.
the zoning of it really sort of makes no difference at that point. So I'm not sure that this accomplishes anything for us.
So you take it out.
That was my thought. So the other thing I wanted to talk about in this chapter 2 was the whole concept here that in terms of how we preserve open space as part of the subdivision process. So the open space regulations right now, the subdivision regulations say that the open space set aside is 15%. It says the commission may.
Right.
So how often do you require open space set aside?
Had one not too long ago, didn't
Well,
you? You said may require?
I think
It
your regulations say
may, but
I take that back. I don't think that was a may. I think it was they wrong. I don't know who that was.
No, I think I think the commission has been more assertive about requiring open space in recent years than in past years. I think the difficulty is that when the building boom occurred in this city in the 50s and more so in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the Planning Commission as a body did very little to require open space. And one of the examples that I use is, again, commission members are aware of this, is that the flooding issues associated with the Copper Mine Brook have been problematic. Copper Mine flows into the Aquatic, and there's been tremendous amounts of flooding in recent years from some of these very, very large storm events. And one of the complaints has been that the city allowed all this development to take place, and a lot of times the blame was given to this planning commission, if you will, that they just let development just happen all along in the watershed. And there's certainly a lot of truth to that, but it's the commission from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and if you look along the Copper Mine Brook, all these subdivisions that were built without any open space along the Copper Mine, as an example, to provide flood storage area, to kind of keep properties out of the flood zone. And I think that, again, this commission and the zoning commission have been more assertive about getting open space, but I think it's much harder than it used to be to start to create open space corridors. The largest, like they've done in other, in other communities, because they've been at it a longer time.
Communities have two schools of thought on this. There are some communities who use the word may and decide on a case-by-case basis. And there's other communities that say shall. And their approach is each subdivider will either give us land or pay a fee in lieu of. But nobody's getting out of here without doing something for open space.
Well, I don't think we've ever excluded anyone from doing one or the other.
Oh, but it's
not in more recent years.
It's been their choice. And again, it's not being critical of this current commission. And again, I think it's in large part because with some degree of truth that the commission has not wanted to take a little acre here and a little acre here and a little acre here, and the ability to link them together is non-existent. So the city ends up owning or maintaining these little parcels of land.
That issue did come up.
That's
It
right.
has
That has
been,
come
but
up.
I think just jumping on what Alan's saying, I don't think that's a great strategy for the city to end up with these sort of measle pieces.
Right, and I don't think
But-
we think that either.
But I think that if the option to a developer was, the choices are, the land set aside in situations where the city wants it, or fee in lieu of, and we're going to push people in one of those directions, that the city might be able to accumulate money to acquire open space for passive or active purposes or something else, where in fact the city might want it, or to take a piece of open space which is currently wooded and put a playground on it, or do something else. So I just wanted to get a sense of what your thoughts were on this, because there were two things that jumped out at me from looking at your regulations. The first of which was the 15% set aside was a may, and I thought that you could strengthen that if you wanted to. And the second thing is that in the subdivision regulations, there's a hierarchy of ownership which is laid out in the regulation. In the hierarchy of ownership, the first choice is a homeowners association. And the challenge that I think I wanted to bring to your attention in terms of open space with a homeowners association is one of the first things you give up with that is essentially public access. And so it's not necessarily that the city has to maintain it, but there can be land trusts or there can be other organizations that might be involved in it, and those could preserve public access. So I think, again, I think a subdivision sort of on Federal Hill, if there was any room for subdivision, it would be very different than something that might happen on Chippen's Hill. But if we had the opportunity to create an open space system or to try to encourage the city to accept open space because it was adjacent to existing land or something else, it might be a way for us to create a meaningful open space system over time. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on those sorts of policies, because I think the plan's a good place to talk about it.
Alan, is there a local land trust?
The Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut have functioned as the land trust in the city. And if you recall the infamous Sunnydale subdivision where there was a piece of open space. Now there's a case where the Planning Commission was pretty adamant about it, but there was a reason why. One in part because it butted up against South Mountain. Your plan of conservation and development specifically talked about preserving South Mountain. There was and continues to be potential for adding on to that to create a much larger open space system. And you had a willing recipient, in this case the environmental, what was then
The former environmental.
Thank you. The former, the Bristol Regional Environmental Center, now the Environmental Learning Centers. So that confluence of circumstances made your requirement that open space be set aside to someone who was going to preserve it, worked. It worked perfect. It worked. I mean, it took a long time to get it, but it worked. And I think the Commission's reluctance to take small piece of open space, and again, I don't say this critically, in part is a result of what your predecessors didn't do, which was see large pieces of large corridors of open space, and then get a piece at a time. So it was easy at the time for a developer to come and go, well, I don't really want to give you open space because it'll only be a couple of acres of land and you'll have to maintain that. And they go, oh, we don't want to do that. Without seeing that, well, if you get a piece here and you get a piece here and you'll eventually get a piece here, it all starts to connect together. And I think you and the Zoning Commission have been much better about that in recent years. And I think a perfect example where this Commission and the Zoning Commission working together to do that has taken place in the southeastern section of the city. We talked about Doug Reef subdivision. That's a place where there were large pieces of open space. And then when Orchard Hill developed, another piece of open space. And when he's done the OSD development on the north side of Allentown Road, more open space. And then his development on the south side when that starts. So you've seen that there was a potential for getting large pieces of connected open space, creating corridors that may do nothing more than just create green space.
Or if you could get a fee in lieu of. So rather than just say to somebody, well, no, we don't want the land, but rather than say, well, then there's no open space obligation, perhaps create a situation that even the city can get a little bit of money from a bunch of different people, it could actually have some benefit. So my thought process, my suggestion for your consideration would be that maybe this plan would include some language that would say something like, consider strengthening the open space set-aside requirement. And then the other strategy might be consider modifying the open space hierarchy, because right now the hierarchy and the regulation is from a homeowners association and the city's the last choice. When in fact, if we're going to create public access in a city-wide open space system, maybe what we should do is ask the city first. The city says no, then we go to the land trust or the environmental learning centers, and if they say no, then it goes to the homeowners association. But at that point in time, there's really no, for passive open space, there's really no maintenance obligation for the city. They've already paid for the liability insurance, so there's no additional, there's no insurance obligation. And it could be something that could pay dividends down the road. And I think the use of the verb consider gives us some room to kind of roll this idea out and see what you
You know how much potential land there is left for this purpose?
Probably more than you think, but not as much as you'd like.
Well, and I was just going to throw out another, idea. I've grown and experienced a whole bunch of different things, is that I don't necessarily think that open space should always be connected, as a corridor. And it's great to think that, you've got this little piece over here and you can generate a corridor to this piece over here and a corridor. But in reality, animals will anything will use those spaces accordingly and get around any bypasses or structures that they have to, and still utilize any small space to a large space as they learn to do it. And humans do the same thing.
They do.
So I'm not excluding
No.
us using those pieces.
And I don't think we are
also.
either. I think the issue ends up being sort of the edge effect of open
It's
space.
how do you, right, is this part like 10 miles away from the next
But
open
if you
space
can connect open
versus-
spaces into a system,
It would be great, yeah.
the value is sort of exponential. So
Right.
I think would you guys be comfortable if we suggested consider strengthening the open space requirements and consider modifying the open space hierarchy? Is that, yes?
Yeah, I would.
So I think we're just,
I think
all of this
that's
stuff at this point in time is tentative. When the
Right.
plan comes together, we'll take a look at it
Mhm.
and decide. Any other thoughts on open space?
Just one observation concerning Marie's observation. I hear what you're saying, but I think traditionally the problem here has been that the Planning Commission, again, your predecessors, and the City Council, their predecessors, were, because open space, if we can't use open space, what's it useful for? Well, we can't put a ballpark on it, can't put a ball field on it, and developers were able to convince the commission and others that a 1 acre piece of property in the middle of a subdivision was going to be nothing but a maintenance headache, or whatever that meant, and that it wasn't worth it for the city to acquire it, because then the city had the liability, and then people will throw their stuff there, and then we're going to maintain it, and it's not doing anything, and therefore no need to take it. Planning Commission members became convinced of that, didn't see the value in having these small pieces of land, didn't see the potential for linking them together, and therefore, up until the last decade or two, the amount of open space that was acquired through the subdivision process in this city, relative to the number of subdivisions and building lots that are approved, is so minuscule when they had opportunities and didn't use them.
So let me throw out something else just for discussion, because I haven't really even thought about this except for in my own world. I have 7 acres. It's mostly wooded. I've given thought to even going through the process of getting it registered under federal registration as a natural habitat. And yet, we talk about subdivisions, we talk about a lot of stuff, but this plan of conservation and development is beyond just development. And so where do we encourage people to look at their...
He's about to get into that.
Okay.
I was thinking the same thing.
I'm just, you know, like
You
I
need
said,
to-
it's just
if
my
you
own
read-
preference.
If you read ahead, that's the
Okay.
next issue.
Are we
Okay.
ready to go to the next?
Yeah,
Anything else on
no,
open
because
space?
apparently I forgot about it.
That's
You know, I've
okay.
been up for almost 24 hours, so I apologize.
Yeah.
It's kind of a micro issue, so maybe it's not something you want to talk about in the plan, but here or somewhere else, it's appropriate to get deeper into discussion on the blighted property question.
Yeah, I think that, hold that, I'm going to make a note here.
Like the open space remind you of that? or what?
So I made a note, that's on page 18, we'll get to that on page 18. So let's, if we can, let's turn our attention to pages 8, 9, and 10. There's a couple of ways that a plan of conservation development can actually be an important document for the city, and one of these is what's called the Open Space Assessment Program. So you may have heard the words what's called PA 490 or Public Act 490. And what this is a state public act that was adopted back in 1963. And what it said was that if land is subject to increasing taxation, property owners are going to sell land, and we're going to lose farmland, forest land, and other land that really contributes to the overall character of the state. So the state established this program, and it's got it's actually got 4 parts to it, but one of them, maritime heritage, doesn't apply here because we're not coastal. So one of them is called the Farm Assessment Program, and so if you have a farm and farm it, you have some farm-related income, you can apply to the assessor, and he can assess your land as tillable land. And the values are put out by the state, and it's much less than a regular house lot, etc. So what it does is it makes land and farmland or working land or forest land less expensive to own, and therefore we end up with undeveloped parcels, which enhance the character of the community. So farm is dictated by the assessor. The farmer goes to him, shows him his information, the assessor evaluates it, and then gives him the farm assessment. So it's up to the assessor. We can't do anything on that. The second program is what's called the Forest Assessment Program. And to be part of the Forest Assessment Program, you have to have at least 25 acres of property. And so they can be across the street from each other, so I can have 10 on one side, 15 on the other, but I got to have 25 total. So you can imagine that there's not a lot of situations necessarily in Bristol where people are going to have that. But there are a number, and if you look at the map on page 10, the ones that are purple are farm, and the ones that are green are forest. They're getting the assessment to that. Now there's this third option, which is called open space assessment. And I really wish they hadn't used the words open space assessment. But what open space assessment is essentially a local option that the community can decide whether or not they would like to encourage the retention of undeveloped land. The way the program works is this idea has to be recommended in the Plan of Conservation and Development, which is where we come in, and then it has to be approved by the legislative body, which would be the council, the city council here. Because in a sense, when you give a tax break to one group, everybody else's taxes are going to go up a little bit. So it needs to be approved. But they can't establish it if it's not recommended in the plan. So the question, this was not addressed at all in the 2000 POCD. From what I've seen from the assessor's records, there's no open space assessment being offered in town. So the question is sent for you, is this something that you would like to consider as part of this plan, or you don't necessarily think it's appropriate and we should move on?
I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, let's consider.
So I think,
For consideration.
and I think that's what I suggested for your discussion on page 9, was encourage the establishment of an open space assessment program within the city, which would apply to parcels less than 25 acres. And then possible recommendations is establish an open space assessment program. So if you're comfortable with this, I think the plan is going to have to suggest some kind of policy or strategy. And I think if you'll allow Alan and Robert and I to kind of talk something out, we'll suggest something for further discussion as we go. But the end result of this program would be that if somebody had a parcel of land of 10 acres in size, or whatever number was picked,
Well, I was just thinking of whether or not you would want to throw in a minimum.
Yes,
You know, type of
absolutely. I
thing.
mean, this is, again, we're trying to sort of accomplish a public policy objective
Right.
here for the city, so that there should be some minimum number. And the power of GIS is that we can run some scenarios and decide what we think might be an appropriate program to provide some of this benefit here overall. This is not a free situation in the sense that if Alan owns property and he is entitled to this, he gets the assessment, there is a recapture provision. If he takes the reduced assessment but sells his property within 10 years, there's a declining capture of the taxes, of the tax benefit that he got. It's still well within his advantage to get into the program, but if somebody was to get in and then flip their property in 2 years, there is some of that money comes back. So it's something that's going to do, there will be a healthy debate in the city about whether this is appropriate, but it can't have that debate unless it's in the plan. So I think that we'll work something out.
Real quick, Glenn, is your experience with communities that have suggested that in their plan, that short of identifying specific parcels of land, that the plan recommends criteria for consideration for the assessor, so if such a program is adopted, the assessor has some guidance as to what the plan conservation development.
And I've seen the gamut. I've seen there are some town plans that identify specific properties. And there are other towns where they've identified the criteria. And my suggestion for this discussion to unfold would be that let's talk about some criteria. And if those criteria make it through to the council, and the council then goes ahead and approves it, then it would get to the assessor. And the assessor would then implement that program. But the policy essentially would start with us. So again, I'll work with Alan or I will put something together.
And Glenn, I think what you're suggesting also is that if you do a GIS analysis, you'll end up hopefully picking a number or a threshold that is specific to Bristol that works for Bristol.
Yeah, I mean, I think that.
Oh, that's a good point. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be tailored to the community.
Yeah.
But you don't want to pick the number so low that everybody who's got, 5,000 square feet behind them, all of a sudden is in trying to get it.
I mean, some communities drop the threshold from 25 acres to 10 acres, or drop it to 5 acres. I can tell you that the town of Avon, for example, had a policy, because they were trying to remain rural as long as they could, because they knew that the suburban development was coming. So their policy was that for any parcel which was more than double the minimum lot size, that means it could be subdivided, another house could be built on it, they would grant the open space assessment to the portion of the lot beyond the first lot. So,
and how did that work out?
well, but the problem was that it actually worked out quite well, because it actually deferred development longer.
Right.
And that's the issue. It's almost, in some community said to me, well, so it's almost like sort of not a rental payment, but you're encouraging people to keep their land undeveloped longer. Yes, that is in fact what you're doing. So it's a lively discussion and debate for communities that establish this, but I think that Bristol, if we don't put it in the plan, it won't happen. So let's let it happen.
Glenn, can I ask you a question on page 10?
Absolutely.
The difference between farm and forest.
Yeah.
If you go to the top left corner,
Yeah.
it's purple up there.
Yeah.
See it? I live across the street from there, and it's all forest. So I don't know where this came from, but is there a difference? I don't know.
Is there any farming activity going on that parcel?
No, the little white in the middle there
Yeah.
is the oldest church in Bristol. It's a little pagan church.
So the purple behind that is?
Woods.
It was probably farmland, and it's probably overgrown by now. It's not
Maybe.
even used.
How old do the trees look?
Once it goes into the.
Yeah.
So I will check that just to make
Okay.
sure.
Just I don't want
It
typos or
would
anything.
be hysterical. Well, I mean, again, a property enrolls in the program. So if somebody lived on that property and had a small flower farm or something like that.
Okay.
But if it's clearly more than 25 acres.
Yeah.
And
Could be a Christmas tree farm.
Christmas tree flowers.
Well, no, I'm just going to make a note here to check this, because we have the assessor's database, and we can look at it. We can also look at the aerial photographs. and we'll get a handle on this. So I can't vouch for exactly how it got into the program, but I certainly can vouch for the fact of whether or not it is in the
Okay.
program. So I'll check that.
Excuse me, I know this is a, public meeting, and I just wanted to make a comment, if that's all right with everybody.
I was just wondering, in regards to the acquisition of open space, is the city going to have a target, and will it be in accordance with, the targets that the state has regarding open space acquisition?
We haven't had a target, it wasn't in the 2000 POCD, and I think the state had adopted a policy or a goal.
20%?
I forget exactly the numbers. 20, I've heard 20, 21, 23%.
I think it's like up to 30 by 2023. That's in accordance with the DEP Green Plan. I guess the state plan of conservation development doesn't really apply to conservation anymore. The OPM is saying refer to the DEP Green Plan, which is quite different. So I'm just wondering, how does that work in with our plan of conservation development here in the city? Especially if we're moving towards,
Good question.
a regional plan.
Some of that may be an analysis of what's really available for
I think there's a couple of things. I don't think, I'll have to go back and ponder this question. The reason is that our ability to set a concrete goal requires really two things. Number one is we have a really good handle on what we got. And right now, in terms of the overall budget on the project and the categorization of land, we do not have a good categorization on the map right now, but Alan's got and done a good job here. So there's two things. First of all, what do we really have? And then the second question, in a sense, is what's left remaining in terms of undeveloped property that could be a goal for us. So if we're, for example, I'm just being silly for a moment, 90% developed, well, we'll never be able to get 30% open space. So the question is, what do we got, and what is our potential, and where is it? If some of our vacant land is in the industrial park, well, it's actually maybe better for us to promote that for development. So it's going to involve a little bit more work, but it's one of the things that we're going to want to try to do in terms of figuring out kind of where we're at. So I've made note of that comment, and it's something I think we'll probably circle back to as we start working on the draft plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have us on page 11. Historic resources. I mean, Bristol's got some amazing historic resources. The key findings, conclusions, and issues. We've got in National Register of Historic Places. We've got a historic resource inventory. We essentially know where they are. The goals and policies and recommendations in the plan are to protect our historic resources. I'm not sure what else to add in terms of protection of historic resources.
There's a couple of minor issues. On page 11, there's a defining here that the second paragraph, Bristol has several listings on the National Register of Historic Places. It makes reference to it as a ceremonial designation. I think we may want to change it to honorary.
Okay.
And also, and we can update this on the middle of page 12, make it where it makes reference to the city's historic resource inventory. Again, and Glenn lifted this from the 2000 plan. Since that, well, actually probably since before then, but certainly since the 2000 plan, there have been, it's a couple of dozen properties at least, that were on the inventory that have been demolished. So that number, the 620, was the number of properties on the inventory when it was completed. That number is down. It's probably, I'm going to speculate, it's probably in the high 500s, but it's that number is no longer accurate. I mean, the inventory still has considerable value. It's referenced in the zoning regulations. So it serves several purposes, but we want to make it clear that that inventory is, sometimes in flux, a little bit in flux.
Is the individual property listed, is the Terry Hayden house the one that got tore down?
No.
different house?
It's a
Yeah, it's a
different
different
one,
house.
but it's been relocated, which has jeopardized its listing.
Is that the
Yeah,
one
that's-
at Calciano's
Yes.
place?
That's the one he moved.
Thank you.
But these are still on the National Register. And I don't know that any individual houses have been added, or individual structures have been added to this list.
I have been to the state and went through their records, and I just haven't yet compared what the state records are current with this listing. I guess my first obligation, I think, was to talk to the commission.
We have another comment. Ellen?
I just wanted to reference the key findings, the language that Alan referenced. I think that there's a lot of confusion over the National Register versus the areas. Plus, we now have a historic district by ordinance. So some of you may not have to deal with how those intersect, but I think it might be good to add some clarification about the fact that people who are within the Overlook Historic District actually have to abide by an ordinance, whereas everything else is largely ceremonial and honorary. However, I do want to point out that the individual properties that are listed on the National Register do have to make annual reports and do have some type of responsibilities when work is done to those individually listed properties. The ones that are contained and are known as contributing structures within a district, such as the Federal Hill, and the other ones that are listed on 12 Main Street, ND Manor, and the South End, that's strictly honorary. They're just a contributing structure within a defined district. So we find that there's a lot of people who tend to be very turned off to historic preservation because they believe that everything, street side, has to be regulated. That is not the case. In fact, I had somebody call me today and yell at me because they need to cut down their Copper Beech tree and they don't think they're going to get permission from the city. We don't regulate that. So if we could maybe, as part of this, have some public education about the differentiations between it so that it's not viewed as an obstructive type of policy and is more celebrates the history, I think that that would be a good add to the section.
It's an excellent observation, because I think that one of the effective ways in the plan is what I sort of call case studies. And I think that if we were to sort of have two boxes side by side that describe National Register District and the other one which is Local Historic District, it really gets exactly what you're talking about. And people do believe National Register must be the pinnacle of historic preservation. The issue is no. I mean, it's a neat place and a neat thing, but it really doesn't. So I think that that's a great observation, and we can effective use of the plan.
Good point.
I think especially in light of, on page 13, the proposed additional policies about supporting the nomination of additional historic districts and individual buildings and/or properties to the National Register of Historic Places. I think in the absence of explaining what that means, it's going to freak people out.
Yep.
That, oh my God, you're going to put my property on the National Register and I'm not going to be able to do anything with it.
And looking also at the bottom of page 13, number 7 also talks about sort of the Main Street program, but also talks about village districts, which is another. It's probably worthwhile here to explain all of these in one setting so that people can kind of.
It sounds like a whole page in itself, if that was mine.
Yeah. Does Bristol have a demolition delay ordinance?
Yes.
Okay.
It's 90 days.
I mean, between the time of, when it's identified and the time when it may or may not get.
It's the delay when the demo permit is pulled, until the demolition can actually occur. And there has to be an advertisement in the newspaper.
Right. So it's an opportunity for people to investigate, research, document, maybe even salvage, but it doesn't necessarily stop demolition. It delays demolition. But it's better than just having a backhoe show up.
That almost happened to the Bristol Elks. They took out a demolition permit. Cheryl Barber Company wanted to stop it.
So you were stuck.
Hey, animal do it.
You're so powerful.
So the map on page 14 shows the location of the historic districts. We did identify here the local historic district, the Overlook one, but I think, again, the explanation in the text And then the red dots, the city's got a great database which shows these historic.
Again, I think one thing that we're going to have to do with you is to give you the list of demolished buildings to make sure that they're not on here.
Yeah, I think the Excel spreadsheet that you
Right,
guys
it had a separate tab with demolished.
I think we just mapped them in.
Okay.
So I've just,
Okay.
make sure.
And I think one thing to point out, and it may be something to point out in the, may or may not be worth pointing out in the text, is that there are properties that perhaps are fall into more than one category. So there are properties that are identified in the historic resources inventory that are in a national register district or in a local district. I think actually there are a couple of properties that are on the national register and in the local district. The Ledges, I think, is on the national register, but also in the local district. So it's possible to be in more than one, or to have more than one designation.
If this commission's okay, I have a historic district commission meeting tomorrow night. I'd like to just make a copy of this section. I'm going to hand that out to them, and certainly if they have any comment, they can filter that back through our office. I think that might be appropriate.
Ready to move on to page 15? In the current plan, the chapter was historic and cultural resources. And again, so it's seen from the discussion we had earlier, I sort of split these up. And part of the reason is that I think historic resources are resources which are valuable because of what they once were. They contribute to the character of the city, they contribute to quality of life, they enrich a lot of what it is that people enjoy about living in Bristol. But cultural resources to me are different than historic, which is why I separated them. To me, the cultural resources are the things here today where activities and other things happen which really enrich our quality of life. These are places in Bristol, the museums, the even plays that go on in schools or concerts and other things like that are really sort of part of the richness of the city. So at least for discussion purposes, I wanted to break them up. We may put them back together again later. But I thought that the cultural resources in the city are kind of important. And I wanted to make sure we had a good listing and we had sort of good strategies related to these. So on the map, which is on page 17, I started to identify the ones that were called out in the 2000 POCD. I added in ESPN. It's certainly something which everybody, it's one of our calling cards, if you will. But I also thought Barnes Nature Center and Imagination should also be added in. These are facilities which people know. And there must be others. I'm sure that you're familiar with more than I am.
The ESPN in the wrong location.
Oh, you know what? Because we went to the website and got their address.
Yeah, that's wrong.
Okay. Down.
I just noticed that. If we're going to leave it on,
We put it in the right place.
Has the Witches done the enclosed?
Yeah, I believe that's.
They're in the process of doing some evaluation by the fire marshal and actually also looking at alternative locations for this October.
Sounds like fun. I've never been there.
Yeah, I think it's so in flux, I'm not sure that at this point it's worthy of keeping in. I know that, it's run by one individual. It's been open typically around Halloween. It's not even, I know there are other privately owned museums around the country and the state, but they have regular hours and people go in. This doesn't even rise to that. So I'm not sure that it's my own opinion, I'm not sure that it's worthy of.
So is there a reason we don't have Indian Rock on this list?
I took the 2000 POCD and I didn't know all of them, but this is exactly the kind of conversation I wanted to have, because that there are things that make Bristol unique and attract people to our community. These are things which really we need to celebrate and call out. And so, I happen to live in Simsbury. They have the Hartford Symphony comes and does the summer concerts.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the sort of cultural resources that we take for granted, unfortunately. We don't have to sort of travel far for it. But I know there's things that go on in Bristol that I just don't know about. And if we can get those into the plan and start to celebrate them, that's what I think our goal should be. So Indian Rock, I'll rely on Alan.
Maybe that's the answer to my question. Is that the Barnes Center is the same?
Barnes Center is on Shrub Road, Indian Rock.
I know. I'm just saying, where's...
Well, Barnes Center is here, number 8.
Indian Rock is up on Route 69.
That's what I was wondering, where...
Across from
Well, it's
Cedar.
not, again, he didn't identify it in the 2000 plan.
Okay.
He just
I get you.
said he lifted it from the stuff from the 2000 plan and then added on.
Are the locations besides the ESPN look right at? No, just take it for any other, let's do this. I would like to suggest that cultural resources be something we celebrate in the plan. I think if there's things that we think about as we go along, we can certainly add them in. I think the policies and recommendations on page 16, which were from the 2000 POCD, I think are strategies I would urge you to consider continuing. And if there's other policies or recommendations that you think that should be added, let's go ahead and do that.
But you were just talking about concert series. I mean, we have that here. The Parks and Rec department does that. I didn't know if that was something.
Where do they do that?
They do it at Russell Park. They had last night.
So, Muzzy Field's on here.
Muzzy Field's next door.
Yes, it is. But I'm just saying that, does it have a special summer concert series? Or is that what they call it? Okay.
Let me throw out a kind of a somewhat more general question about this section. I agree with the concept, and this may be a matter of semantics more than anything else, but sometimes that makes a difference. I'm bothered, is perhaps too strong a word. I'm concerned about the use of the term cultural resources, because I think that connotes something that to some people is highbrow and I would say not appropriate. I mean, every community has cultural activities and cultural resources, but I think the word can have a connotation that may be bothersome to people, and that it doesn't convey what you're really trying to convey. And I don't know if there's a better term, a broader term, a more inclusive term, a more accurate term.
No, that's a great observation, because I realize now as you say that I took the text from the 2000
Right.
POCD
Right.
that mixed cultural and historic together. I separated them apart, and as I was looking through the list, I saw the Giamatti Little League Center, and I said, oh, well, if that's on the list, then why isn't ESPN on the list?
Right.
And I started to go in a different direction, but you just sort of, you pulled me back a little bit. And so I think my question, or our question really for the board would be, how do we want to approach this chapter? Because we can do it really cultural, highbrow, which would be the museums and, I mean, Lake Compounce was on the list, so, I mean.
Right. And I see, the distinctions I see among them is, again, you certainly have museums here. I think that's one of the things people think of as a cultural resource. Lake Compounce, I would see as a kind of a popular cultural resource. And I don't say it have any negative connotations. But it's certainly one of the things that defines Bristol. But I don't think one would think of it as a cultural resource. Something like ESPN, I would see on the list not because it should be singled out as a business, this business as opposed to the Barnes Group or any other number of other businesses, but ESPN itself is a popular culture icon. It's
But
a
I'm wondering
conversation we
if
had.
this isn't an opportunity for us to have a little fun in the plan.
Sure.
And so we talk about cultural resources in Bristol, but let's talk about two types. There's several types of historic districts, right? So we have traditional cultural resources, which are the museums and things like that. We have sports cultural resources, which could be ESPN and Giamatti. And we could also have pop culture.
Now, what's pop
which
culture?
is, what is pop culture? It's something which is sort of not traditional highbrow culture, but it's the witch's dungeon was going to stay in here. I mean, that's kind of an offbeat kind of thing, which kind of makes us different. So we can celebrate all sorts of types of culture in our community, right? And so I'm throwing an idea out for discussion.
These are valid, and you ought to have valid reactions. But if we're going to define our community's culture, why is it not enough just to call what we think is culture as culture? Instead of putting degrees of high, low, pop today,
Well,
not pop tomorrow.
I don't think
you
there's
go on and on with
degrees.
that.
I don't think there's degrees. I think that, let me put it this way, I think if you don't differentiate them, I think the risk you run is someone going, well, ESPN isn't a cultural resource, it's a business. Why is that business here? Because to the outside world, it represents, they don't know anything about the campus, the building, they don't know anything about it. The point is that ESPN, as a popular cultural phenomenon, I mean, that's what it is to the rest of the world. If you go, you could go overseas and mention ESPN, and people may not know where it is, but they know what it is, and it has a meaning in the popular culture. It's become part of the lexicon of contemporary popular culture, and but it's clearly not the Clock and Watch Museum.
It goes to the effects of the Empire State Building. That's, that's a privately held building, but it's such a deterrent.
It's an iconic.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we can leverage off, whatever these resources may be, however we characterize them, if we can start to leverage off of those to attract people to Bristol, because we're more than just one thing, and let people know that we're not just like compounds, we're all these other things too, or we're not just a music series or a concert or whatever, there's other stuff like that to do. We start to build on things, and I think that could be good for us. So I'd like to try to take a shot at being a little playful with this and talk about cultural resources, as Bristol has a variety of cultural resources. They fall in different categories, and you could broaden your horizons by coming to Bristol and then talk about them and let people know that there's sort of a critical mass of stuff that goes on here that many people just probably don't know about. So is it okay if I take a shot at that?
Yes.
Yeah, I just don't want us to get into
Judgments.
Yeah, this is the pop culture, so you can go by that page if you want.
But people make up their own.
But when you go back and you say it has a variety, I think that explains it. They're not going to be, by any definition, they're not all going to be alike anyway.
Right. But that speaks to why I have pause about using the term cultural resources, because I think that, fairly or not, I think it conjures up a particular idea in people's minds, and once they latch on to that idea, there are going to be things in this list that people would not typically associate with cultural resources.
But that's where I think if we can be a little playful. I was thinking that, well, let's just replace the word cultural.
Right. I don't know what the
But I
word
don't
would be,
know
yeah.
what there is. So I think if...
What you going to replace it with?
I don't know yet.
So, but I think I'd rather say cultural resources and then be a little playful with it in terms of it's everything from lake compounds, the oldest continuously operating amusement park in the country, all the way through to the Little League Center. I mean,
It's what we are.
it is what we are.
And I don't think you need just one word. You can do community / cultural / popular
Yep.
/ whatever, add on to that list.
Yep.
I think that a lot of them are community assets, so cultural resources and community assets, whether you're talking about Little League, which a family looks for when they're coming in, versus museums, versus outdoor concerts. Those are all they all speak to the quality of life of what the assets are to a community. When you have a dearth of them, it's very recognizable, and when you have a plethora of them, then you advertise them. So a lot of it depends on what audience you're playing to. You know, I personally, you know, if I were coming into town and I knew there were 3 strong little leagues, one of which are seniors, won their game today in New Jersey and are going to the World Series in Bangor for that age group, that's a great thing. And a sports-minded family is going to look for those types of amenities.
I like that title,
That's a
too. The
great
cultural
reason why
resources
no one
and
knows
community
that.
assets now gives us the flexibility within that.
Absolutely.
I'm also going to see if I can use the words dearth and plethora in the same sentence.
All right, I'm working on that. I'm trying to work on...
I'm being playful, I'm being playful.
Yeah, well...
Are you writing the sports
No,
article
no.
over there? It sounds like you're writing the next article.
I am multitasking, John, but it's not a sport.
I'm ready to go to page 18. So then this is now community character strategies. And community character is a little bit about sort of the appearance of a community. Now, when I question people on other planning assignments about this concept of community character, everybody says it's the most important thing to them about their community, but then everybody has a different expression about what that really is. But it really kind of gets down to your impression and your feeling about the community and how it presents itself. So I thought that this is something that wasn't included in the 2000 plan. I thought it was something that was important. I think that some of the issues which I've identified here on page 18 could be elements of community character. Scenic views, hillsides, ridgelines, farms. People are surprised to find the number of farms that are in Bristol. When I tell people that it's not their impression of the community at all. I want to spend some time and talk about architectural review, community design, but community facilities and services, events, street lighting, underground utilities, light, as Paul mentioned earlier. These are all things that sort of contribute or change your impression of a community. So should we have policies or strategies on these, and sort of what should they be? What are your thoughts?
I guess I'm wondering, so are you talking just really about the physical appearance of the community? So it seems to me the character of the community goes back to the things we just talked about, the community's assets. That's the character of your community, not just whether you have farms or trees here or whatever.
No, it could. I mean, we could blend those two together.
I just didn't know what the
It's hard to
thrust of
describe.
this
It's hard to describe,
chapter
Paul.
would be.
Character is not a straightforward topic like transportation or, you know, utilities or something like that. It's more of an emotional
I
thing.
guess you could say the whole of your plan of conservation and development speaks
All
to the
related to
character of the community,
Yes.
not just one chapter of it.
And I think, you know, one of the things that I sort of wanted to talk about here a little bit was this concept of sort of architectural review and community design. We really don't have a community design program in place for that. So there are communities around the state that have design review boards, and they look at architectural design of buildings. So one of the stories that I hear all the time is that, you know, the CVS in my town is very different than the CVS in this other town. Why is that? And for many years I worked for a private development company, and my responsibility was to get permits and approvals. So the first thing I tried to figure out was whether or not they had design review. When I found out they didn't, what do you think I went in with? When I found out that they did, what do you think I went in with? So it just seems to me that in terms of building a community, that if we have some design guidelines or design review process and let people know we care about the appearance of our community, we're not going to stop development. We're not going to prevent development. But if we can make changes that make development fit in better with the character of our community, that might be something for us to consider. Now, the Planning Commission doesn't have the ability to make this happen, but you do have the ability to suggest this be something that we contemplate or consider as part of our work in the future. And it can make a difference in terms of community character. So these are the types of things that can end up in this chapter, as well as other things in terms of community spirit and events and activities, etc. What are your thoughts in terms of community design? Want to say anything in the plan on that, or let it go?
I'm just trying to think of now versus 8 years from now, 9 years from now, how that might affect the process. I can remember us looking at a couple of site plan improvements and asking, what's the building going to look like? What material are you going to use on the outside? And even though we had no jurisdiction to tell them yes, we did tell them what we recommended.
Remember that auto place?
Yeah.
It was a boilerplate.
Yeah.
But you also remember we had a struggle trying to communicate that to them? And one of the reasons we had is that we don't have, we know we want it, but we don't have a definition for it.
And
We know we did one.
especially as downtown would get developed and things change and right now I have a hard time envisioning that working because of what other area of the town that might come together and do something, but as we go forward with more creative downtown, there's certainly, if you look at the maps, there's definitely more residential than business areas. I can't imagine it wouldn't be helpful to recommend that happens.
I guess my question would be, to what end?
Good question.
And I will tell you that the downtown zoning regulations, in fact, do have, I don't want to say design standards.
But it has some.
It has what would be considered a form-based
Right.
component to it, so that while it's not intended to stifle creative architectural design, it's intended to accomplish certain design functions.
Scale.
Scale,
amenities.
bulk, those kinds of
Yeah,
things.
street
But
front.
my experience in looking at other communities and working in other communities where, and I'm not saying this to rule it out here, but very often the community has a particular, very often it's communities that are more rural, less developed than a place like Bristol, where there is there's a design or an array of designs in the buildings, in their town center, in the residential development, and it's they want to maintain that. Quite honestly, I think sometimes they do so. I don't say a detrimental way, but we want every building to have a colonial look, and there's a school of thought that says, well, look, they didn't build a fast food restaurant. How are you going to design? You're going to design with a colonial look, and it'll great, except it's false relative to that actual use, because you can't find fast food restaurants from 200 years ago that had a colonial look, because they didn't exist. So, but there are communities that have a certain
Want to maintain that thought.
yeah, and I guess the question that I would ask the commission is, to what end are you trying? Do you see having architectural review or community design accomplishing? If it's just simply so we can get some nicer looking buildings, well, personally I think there are other ways to do that.